Welcome back, everyone, to another Redbelly Insights podcast. This is episode 15. I am your host, Mark, aka Captain Z5 from Not Centralized, one of the partners of Redbelly. We're doing the whole Project Acacia piece of work. I've got a special guest back on because we've had you on the show before, but Matt Hale, head of product. Welcome back.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here with you. Very excited to discuss the white paper with you today.
Same here. But before we get into that, I do need to share the disclaimer that this AMA is for informational purposes only. Redbelly Network is a blockchain infrastructure provider and does not endorse or promote any financial products or investment opportunities. All opinions expressed are those of the speakers. Please do your own research and comply with applicable laws in your jurisdiction. I will get better at that. I'll have to think about like some music, some rap music in the background to maybe make that a tune too. But Matt, it's been a few episodes since we've had you on. How have you been? What have you been up to lately?
Oh, things have been great. Been very, very busy in the product development side of things at Redbelly, working on some exciting new features coming in the near future to the execution layer and the application layer. So very excited to maybe come back and talk about those again sometime. But yeah, been busy, but very happy.
It's funny because it's like you see the community. There's a whole lot of really interested people in like what is going on with partners, with the space. I mean, apart from the price, and that's missed the market, that the control of that. But we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for product. So just need to tell that and reiterate it again that there's a whole lot of technical stuff that goes on that makes, and this is where the real magic is. Like, if it's easy to use, it's easy to do, it's seamless, it's like, wow, that means there's a whole lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes. So looking forward, and we'll bring you back on to showcase that kind of stuff. But we're going to be talking about the white paper today that was put out a few weeks ago. We've had some I wouldn't say press, but let's just say that we put out our own kind of like media on that, just covering some of the key highlights there. And the community's dived into it, which was great. A lot of like really great insights there. But for those that are newer to Redbelly, from your standpoint, being leading the technical side of things, what is the goal of this white paper? That's like the first and primary question we've had people ask.
Yeah, for sure. So we really wanted to do a refresh of the white paper. The original one we published quite a couple of years ago, I think more than 2 years ago at this point. And at that time, the market was a little bit different in crypto. No one was talking about real world assets. No one was talking about applying the technology to the TradFi space, at least not outside of some closed networks, if you like, or some private permissioned projects focusing on a specific asset class, but no one was really thinking of public networks targeted at real world assets. And so that was a really new idea at the time, or at least not one that a lot of people were talking about in the space. And so it was one reason, is the market turning towards real world assets and that becoming a really strong theme. We felt that we wanted to really put our stamp more firmly, or plant our flag in that camp, so to speak, more firmly for people, using the language that people are more familiar with now in the space around real world assets. Originally we always talked about compliant asset tokenization, but that really is it's the same thing as real world asset tokenization. And so we felt we were maybe a little bit ahead of the curve there, which is great, but also deserving of a refresh in that respect. And then the other big reason we wanted to refresh the white paper was all of the changes that have come about over the last couple of years as a result of AI and AI prominence and moving towards agents and the agentic economy. We felt that there needed to be more of a vision painted for the community and the market at large, as far as Redbelly is concerned, around how we want to position ourselves to moving towards that future. Because again, when we published our original versions of the white paper, that was well before even ChatGPT was around. And so AI wasn't really on the horizon, at least for many in the market at the time. And so we wanted to kind of bring these two things together to paint a really coherent vision for how we believe the technology can revolutionize financial products of the future. And that's what we've done.
Nice. Well, you mentioned it there that it was around this idea of compliant, at first compliant tokenization and whatnot, and now we're seeing more wording around this concept of like open capital markets, which is a big piece of what blockchain is originally designed to do, but we didn't see it too much, and it's only now that instos are more coming in, and the white paper kicks off with like a big question, right? What's broken in today's financial system? And why can't existing blockchains fix it? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think as far as we're concerned at Redbelly, there's in the existing financial system, there's a lot of structural inefficiencies that are in place at the moment. And that's in many areas and many respects. But I guess one way to think about it is most of the financial system, as it pertains to these real world assets, big financial products that happen, trades that happen between institutions, a lot of these still happen via, say, spreadsheets and phone calls. So like from a technology base, on speaking, inefficiency in that respect, the tech stack or the trust stack is really outdated. And there's also we've seen a lot of market concentration in the space as well. And that combined with these structural inefficiencies really impact a lot of asset issuers in terms of their ability to compete, their competitiveness in the market, and their ability to raise money. So their cost of capital is increased because of a lot of these things. So you have a few smaller players in the market that are not able to compete with a lot of the big players because the big players have a monopoly or an effective monopoly, a lot of market concentration there. And because of the inefficient infrastructure that's used to manage and facilitate these assets, it's hard to get a better cost of capital when you don't have the scale of the big players. And so it kind of is a flywheel of negative effects there that decreases competition, increases concentration over time. And that's a source of a lot of problems in the industry as far as we're concerned, because a lot of the big players, they might not have the incentive to change necessarily either, because the current system is working quite well for them. They're able to, have huge margins or charge excessive fees because they don't need to be as competitive because they're sitting on their monopoly power pretty prettily. And so a big part of the problem we want to solve is to enable these smaller players to be a lot more competitive. So we're trying to commoditize the infrastructure of a capital market, make it a programmable capital market that's democratized for everyone in the industry to leverage and use. And then once we get the assets and asset classes a bit more competitive, the players in the space, we feel that then introduces some solutions or opportunities for solutions for the end user, ultimately the investors, you and I, who might want to get access to some of these wealth generating opportunities that at the moment they're not accessible to us. They're kind of closed off behind walled gardens, or you have to have sufficiently high capital or volume. We're talking like multi-millions sort of purchase sizes in order to play in some of these financial products. And as soon as you can commoditize that infrastructure, make it as cheap and efficient as possible to transact in a compliant way, then you can open up opportunities for wealth generation for the average person, which is really what Redbelly is all about. We're trying to enable equal economic opportunity through trustworthy technology. And so commoditizing the infrastructure is the first step towards getting there, we feel.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that people will really see that especially as it's a prominent kind of question that's posed in that white paper. And it's always good to remeasure. I see a similar problem. It was spoken about for Australia's pension fund or superannuation system, and even in the ETF space where I did a lot of work in, where you see a lot of these, like, say, larger ETFs, and it is a bit of a flywheel problem where big companies like the Nvidias, the Microsofts, etc., they get inserted as part of these big, larger index funds because, like, whether it's ASX 20 or like the NASDAQ 100 or like some of the top, FANG type names. It's not Fang, it's like something else now, but it used to be Facebook, Apple, etc. But the problem being that because they're big, they just continue to grow as more things get pulled into those funds. Regardless of how good they are, there is that flywheel of just continual kind of growth because they've hit a threshold where it spirals towards a future where innovation is less likely looked at from the smaller players, and where similarly trying to make those opportunities to either invest in or to build upon more available. And you mentioned as well the role of AI there, and I think it's really important that it's highlighted here because that wasn't really something that could be done before. Because we had GPT, 1, 2, 3, and then it wasn't until ChatGPT that things really went mainstream. But one of the most compelling themes is AI that you guys talk about there. But it's clear that we're moving towards more intelligent financial services. But what does that future look like, and why does it require a new kind of blockchain, do you think?
Yeah, great question. I think as financial services become more and more intelligent or consumed by AI agents, we're going to see the need for infrastructure that's able to kind of keep guardrails up for those agents. And I mean, we see this in different respects in machine learning as I guess an industry more broadly, but the ability to sort of attribute intent and or constrain the actions of AI in such a way that you can see through the black box, so to speak, so that you can have confidence around the actions that an AI is taking. I think having an accountable data layer or an accountable blockchain as the fundamental place from which an AI agent's actions can be kept in check, so to speak, based on the programmatic constraints of the smart contract is an important first step, or maybe not first step, but an important step towards an intelligent financial future. So that's the first thing I'd say, but maybe taking it back a step, I think the power of the technology, AI that is it can help us to democratize financial literacy and to a great extent. So that the average person doesn't need to understand the intricacies of any particular asset or even how to construct a well-diversified portfolio of assets. We can outsource a lot of this to technology with appropriate guardrails by using AI and machine learning. So I'm excited to see how the tools can be used across a bunch of areas. I mean, I'm talking about it from a perspective of an end investor, say for portfolio construction. I think it's quite likely that in the near future we'll have agents that are licensed potentially with appropriate regulatory oversight to do portfolio construction for retail investors, and kind of take the burden of that financial literacy requirement or that knowledge away from the individual, again with appropriate guardrails. So I'm excited to see the application of the technology in that area in particular. But I think there's other areas as well where the agents could be applied appropriately across the full workflow, let's say, of a securitization workflow. So I think for asset issuers as well, there's a lot of potential in the technology to help in the issuance process of tokenized securities, as well as in the ongoing compliance assurance of that are kind of required by regulators with these assets. So, for example, just having AI keep an eye on evolving regulatory constraints and flag preemptively when settlement is published across the network where assets may or may not be impacted, informing asset issuers proactively rather than them having to have their full compliance teams constantly on the lookout and exposing themselves to risk in a kind of a fast-changing environment. That's just one example is where I think that the tech could be really useful for asset issuers as well. There's all sorts of, we talked about in the white paper, a couple of different examples as well around regulators where agents could definitely help regulators keep across the plethora of tokenized assets, that we'll see coming down the pipeline in the near future. But yeah, happy to touch on any other areas there if I haven't answered your full question. Sorry about that.
No, you have. I think people should. I'm putting it right here. Read the white paper, folks. Like the link is right there, and hopefully they're doing that whilst they are listening to this. The other part is that a lot of people think about and it's great that you touch on that. They think about, okay, well, AI helps everywhere, sort of thing, but it's also like, where does blockchain help AI, right? Like, we know that AI helps all these different industries and technologies, and AI definitely helps blockchain from whether it's a marketing perspective, whether it's like how you can test things, and like even to the coding side of things. It's been unbelievable the types of things that I can create now that we've got AI. But the reverse is also very interesting, especially blockchain through the security angle, and blockchain for the type of features that it has around, let's say, with zero knowledge proofs, being able to share only certain parts of the data set to prove, for example, that I looked at this certain document that you provided and I've done analysis on that as part of my AI query. I could provide a proof, a ZK proof that shows that. But I think we're going to see, again, like you mentioned, a plethora of different sorts of use cases when you combine these two things together. So it's exciting to see. And, where people worry about, oh, well, AI hallucinates and stuff, it's like there's devil in the detail. There's nuance there. If you build the appropriate guardrails, and I would argue that one of those very important guardrails is to have elements of your AI stack connected to blockchain, whether it's to prove that experts or humans were in the loop or for some other security angle. There are ways that you can have these better guardrails around there. So we'll definitely dive into that as, you have some of the product developments that you share and that we, continue to build as Not Centralized with you guys. But let's jump into the technology part, your favorite part, your day to day and focus. You guys have designed Redbelly to offer, let's call it, there's finality, there's accountability, security, and throughput, FAST, fast. Can you break down how the DBFT consensus that Redbelly's built on and algorithmic accountability actually work a bit more in like plain terms? How would you explain it to someone who's just like new, you've met them off the street? They sound like they're a really good Redbelly use case, but how would you explain those things to them?
Yeah, great question. I'll do my best to do justice to DBFT. I'm sure if you guys will have Vincent on at some stage, if he hasn't already, to talk about more of the technical aspects behind DBFT. But I think I'll do my best to stay high level and away from a lot of the detail. So DBFT is our consensus algorithm, which is different to other blockchains out there. In fact, it's the only consensus algorithm that we're aware of that's been formally verified, which gives a lot of great confidence to asset issuers using our technology that the consensus algorithm is provably true, that it will execute as intended, which is great, which is not a feature that most popular blockchains out there have. So I think especially when you're dealing with regulated assets, it's quite important. But in terms of how the algorithm works, in layman's terms, most blockchains are typically competitive. So you would have the different nodes or governors or validators that are trying to run the consensus, typically competing with one another. So they are competing for the right to write or produce the next block in the blockchain. And so they're working against each other, and that's part of the economic incentive in the sense that if they're first, or if they solve the crypto puzzle in proof of work first, then they get the right to mint or mine or produce that next block, and then they get rewarded for that with the block reward, as well as obviously fees from the transactions as well. And so that's typically how a blockchain consensus algorithm works. But in DBFT, we have a collaborative as opposed to a competitive approach. And so the collaborative nature of DBFT means that as we add more governors to the network, we're able to scale the throughput by the number of governors. So there's a relationship between how many governors we have and how many transactions in a super block we can produce, proportional. And Vincent will be able to definitely get into more of the technical detail around the nature of that relationship. And that's fantastic, because that means that we're only limited by bandwidth effectively at some point. And particularly when you take sharding into account, which is a whole different kind of feature set on top of that, gives us some great scalability. So that's from a throughput perspective, so the T. Then we talked about FAST, and I've just gone to T first, so apologies for that. Security, we already spoke about the formally verified nature of DBFT, which is great. And I think another nature of the consensus algorithm that's worth talking about is that it doesn't fork. It's not able to fork. So once the block is, or the super block is added to the chain, there's no uncle chains that kind of spawn from the currently accepted block, and then you wait 10 minutes for a number of block confirmations to again kind of collapse the canonical chain to this is the version of the truth. In Redbelly, as soon as the way the algorithm works is as soon as the block is confirmed, or I don't want to use the wrong word, but like mined or added to the chain, it's final. So we have a quasi-instant finality. So once it's in, it's done. And that's fantastic as well that's the F in finality. And that's particularly useful for financial applications as well, where you really need certainty over your trades. It's quite a drawback if you have to wait, even if it's not 10 minutes, but even if it's 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it kind of limits the kinds of applications that you can build on top, particularly if you have, say, I don't know, like an auction style use case where you might need to make a transaction before you're able to then execute other logic. And if you have to, every time you do that, you're having to wait 20 or 30 seconds or whatever it may be, that's problematic in terms of the performance of that use case. And we know, a general principle I like to try to enshrine in our product development. It needs to be at least 10x as good as what's currently available. So Web3, we're competing with Web2 experiences, and Web2 experiences are pretty good. So you've got to be at least as good, if not a lot better, in order to know you're onto a winner. Anyway, I digress. So I think the last one will be accountability, and that's really our sort of approach to algorithmic accountability. And so this is another innovation that's come out of Vincent's research through his various partnerships with different universities and his academic work, which allows, it's an addition to DBFT. It's not a native feature of DBFT, but it's an additional feature, if you like. And it allows us to produce undeniable proofs of fraud, which means that even if you have like a colluding majority of nodes, or you have some colluding nodes, some nodes that are misbehaving on the network, and they try to double spend or reorder transactions or do something that's in their favor on the network that's misbehaving, the algorithm is able to produce an undeniable proof that they are trying to misrepresent the truth. And through an automated process at the other end of that, we can kick the set of governance. So we can enforce that algorithmic accountability automatically. And that just helps to provide additional levels of assurance to the users and participants in the network that the majority or the truth is being adhered to, if you like. So I think that's a broad overview of FAST. I'm happy to go into more detail on anything if you like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think people will ask questions about that. It's definitely more on the from the community side of things. It's good to know that what you're supporting is built on good tech, and it is. Like, name me another blockchain where it actually improves performance and doesn't slow down to that chokehold or the bottleneck where when you have more people on there. You see it with like traditional networks and stuff as well, where it's just like really, the more congestion there is, you do have those congestion problems. With Redbelly DBFT, it is designed to actually improve because it's more democratic. It actually is collaborative, as you mentioned there. We'll dive into more of those details. And there's a whole lot of stuff on tokenization, and we have our RWA guest on. One really interesting thing, I think, was the Bitcoin liquidity part. That was really interesting and pointed out by a few people. that you introduce this like native BTC bridge, and not just to hold it, but to actually use it, put it to work there. How does bringing Bitcoin onto Redbelly unlock, let's call it capital efficiency and liquidity for the ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. This is a really exciting part of the white paper that we're pretty excited about over here. And when you think about what we're trying to achieve, I mentioned before this idea of a programmable capital market, right? And in a capital market, you really need to have a source of collateral and liquidity to bootstrap and inform the nature of different use cases. So you need something to lend and borrow against, for example. Now, there are many ways to kind of try to bootstrap that collateral and liquidity. And when we were thinking about and developing the strategy over many months, we identified it's almost an elephant in the room, so to speak, which is that Bitcoin, I think it's like the 7th largest asset globally now. And that's insane when you think about it, because if you think about how liquid it is as well, it's got an incredible kind of liquidity profile that is very attractive from a capital markets perspective as a form of collateral and liquidity. And the other almost nature of Bitcoin, I mean, this is starting to change at the moment. We're seeing some applications like Bitcoin DeFi and things like that. So for the most part, a lot of that capital is just lying dormant and underutilized in wallets. It's not actually, other than capital appreciation through speculation, it's not actually doing any work for the people who are holding it. And so what we're looking to do is try to liberate the dormant capital from those places, and in a safe and efficient way, bring it across to Redbelly for the purpose of using as collateral, say in a lending and borrowing protocol, or as a source of liquidity for some of our asset issuers and investors in certain assets. And by bootstrapping a significant pool of capital through Bitcoin onto the network, it helps us to get to the next level in terms of having enough collateral and liquidity on the network to drive the asset issuers to also be interested in participating on the network. So it's like almost two-sided marketplace. It's more complicated than that, but effectively like two-sided marketplace, you need liquidity and collateral, and you need assets, and they both need each other, and you have to try to bootstrap a programmable capital market, like as a network, we need both, and we need both simultaneously. And so it's this, you've heard of a two-sided market problem in kind of, typical web development, I guess. This is similar in concept. We've got to bring both things online at the same time to really get the flywheel going.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant that there is that ability to bring it over. And I've known, discussions, because obviously I'm privy to what Not Centralized and Arturo is chatting about with you guys, the conversations there. And it just would be such a shame if we weren't able to put Bitcoin to use. There was all that push to make it programmable and great, trying to make it more like Ethereum, but technically don't necessarily have to do too much. Like as an asset class being the 7th, I was just trying to get the numbers on where it's at right now, but growing as we know, hitting all-time highs all the time. But yeah, it's certainly a useful kind of asset class. You see here in Australia, businesses making it available as collateral to borrow against. That's one type, but there's certainly other things that it could be put to use for in the tokenization world. Going back to the compliance side of things, we talk about it as compliance by design, not just policy. And blockchain is really interesting there, because with blockchain, it's all about, in a real world, you have rules and regulations and then actions and enforcement after the fact as someone broke the law, right? Like you sold wholesale assets to a retail investor. With blockchain, it really changes things, because you can put the rules inside there so that people are not, even if they wanted to, able to do things. But one of the things that stood out is that you said in the white paper, compliance as a composable primitive. I want to get into what that means, and like, how does Redbelly ensure that every asset interaction remains compliant without slowing down the innovation side, which typically happens?
Yeah, so really important area of discussion and a great question. I think important to state up front that Redbelly itself is not ensuring that each asset issuer, for example, is compliant in the sense that we don't have people on our side ensuring that doesn't matter what's deployed on our network, that is compliant. Ultimately, the compliance responsibility still lies with the asset issuer, and that's because that's how the regulatory regime currently works. Is you would have an asset issuer that's regulated to offer their assets, products or services in, say, specific jurisdictions or to specific classes of investors. They have a series of rules that they need to meet. And so what we're trying to do at Redbelly is provide asset issuers with the primitives, so these compliance primitives, for them to ensure that they meet their compliance obligations in as easy and programmable a way as possible. So as you mentioned, being able to program the rules. Obviously, you have like rules as logic in a smart contract, and a lot of people might be tempted by the notion of code as law. But that's definitely not the philosophy that we have at Redbelly. Code is a tool to help ensure you remain compliant with the law. But just because you've got a rule written in code doesn't mean you're automatically compliant. There are all sorts of other conditions that also need to be met to remain so. So, we built a residential data model as part of our World Asset SDK. Some product stuff I would love to talk more about sometime soon. And those are an example of some of the compliance primitives needed by asset issuers to program into their assets the rules that they need to meet their obligations. And that's just one example. There's also all sorts of policy rules. We have a partner who's developed some exciting tech there that can be used to program policies, smart contracts, to help inform how assets not only are programmed within themselves, but to help inform how they're traded on secondary markets as well, which is a whole other area of complexity for compliance that needs to be taken care of. And yeah, there was something else I wanted to say on that. Just trying to remember. Yeah, so your question referred to how can we ensure compliance by design without slowing down innovation, and I think we do that by providing their primitives in a way that they can be used by asset issuers to ensure their compliance, but make it as easy as possible to consume. So we're trying to do a lot of the heavy lifting for asset issuers so that it becomes a no-brainer for them to adopt our compliance primitives. And by doing so, then they can get the flywheel going and get up and running in a compliant way much more quickly.
No, that's great. I think that there's a lot to unpack on that, especially a lot of people would just brush aside compliance as just a need to have after you built all the other stuff. But by understanding the importance of it and building with it at the very heart of what you're doing, I think it just saves a whole lot of headaches later on. Let's go back to the community side of things. Oh, go ahead. Go.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that I think something I should have mentioned before, but by providing these primitives in a way that's kind of programmable, we can then make the assets. This is another key part of our value proposition called compliance composability. So DeFi is fantastic because it allows you to compose assets together in really new and novel ways to get all sorts of benefits that are not possible with traditional kind of financial assets. But by introducing these compliance primitives, we can bake that compliance in with that composability process. So the compliance of an asset is inherited as it gets composed into more complex and diverse assets. And you can build other compliance rules on top of that too. So that's really a game changer in the way people are thinking about doing compliant asset tokenization, we feel. So we're very excited to see it used by asset issuers.
Yeah, absolutely. Making their life easier, which leads to making the life of customers easier. Final one, and we'll wrap up on community sort of thing, where the builders on Redbelly, what kind of projects or builders are already starting to build in this, let's call it like AI first, RWA native infrastructure? What are you seeing over there?
Yeah, what are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of customers be very interested in the reusability of, say, verifiable credentials as a means to for their investors to prove their eligibility. They really get that value proposition and are very excited about it. And refining the UX there is, I think, a key step to overcome in order to make it truly scalable to the masses. So that's something we're working on very closely with some customers. In terms of AI specifically, I think there are a few partners that we have in the, I kind of touched on it before, using a particular AI data lake in order to identify the compliance rules that they need to adhere by, and then in real time almost have like a compliance oracle, going back to this global registry of kind of regulatory data, which is pretty cool. That's probably more as not a customer, as an asset issuer directly, but as a tool for them. And one of the things that we're trying to do in the product development side is really make the tools that we build consumable by AI agents. So that gives customers the opportunity to integrate with our SDK in such a way that it can be used by AI agents moving forwards in the future. So that might look like agents consuming the eligibility criteria of a particular asset and then surfacing a request to a user for them to use their credentials to prove their eligibility. So we have a few customers who are kind of exploring ideas like that, and hopefully some will come online soon with some AI and power products. That'd be great.
Yeah, looking forward to it, especially that crossover. But Matt, we're out of time. What is the best way for folks to reach out to you if they've got ideas, they want to ask you more questions? Obviously, we've got the redbelly.network site, the white paper that was shown on screen here before. But yeah, what's the best way for people to reach out to you if they're interested?
Yeah, absolutely. People can email me or link. I'm on LinkedIn as well if you prefer that platform. Discord, I'm in the Discord community there, so that's also a good option. Do use Telegram as well, but I'm less active on Telegram than I should be.
Perfect. I think plenty of ways to reach out, and if they have any trouble, definitely reach out to us here. We'll put some comments in wherever you are, whether it's on Twitter, LinkedIn, you're watching this, or YouTube. Definitely much more on the Twitter X side of things. But Matt, Hale, thank you so much for diving into the white paper, taking time out of your busy day as well. And we look forward to seeing you on for another update.